It's Sunday night, and we're talking about demons on Sunday night. We're actually talking about doctrines of demons. We don't believe in demons here at Grace and Truth Ministries. All the churches in the country, most of them believe in demons. I was a gospel singer for many years, and I traveled throughout America. I traveled everywhere, up in Washington State and down through Oregon and California. I got stuck in Klamath Falls, Oregon one time for about 3 days. I've been stuck in a lot of places. I broke down in Raleigh, North Carolina. I blew a motor up somewhere up there in Virginia, and I got 1,000 stories about where I've been. And as a gospel singer, you go into a lot of Pentecostal churches, and they believe Pentecostal means you believe in not Pentecost, but Pentecostal. It means you believe in tongues. It means you believe in faith healing, and we don't believe in any of that. And it means you believe in demons, and we absolutely do not believe in demons. I've been in so many churches where some guy'd be wallowing on the floor and going around in circles, like laying flat down like Curly. You remember Curly when he would go, whoop, 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 and he'd be going around in a circle? I've seen Pentecostals do that. It was the wildest, craziest looking stuff. And they would say that they were having some experience from God, and they weren't. They were just involved in their imagination and in an adrenaline rush. Now, we don't believe in demons. The word demon, where it comes from the word daimonion, and that's a Greek word. Daimonion is a form of D-A-I-M-O-N, daimon. That's our word demon. But this word daimonion, that was a god in the ancient world. What has happened with this thing, demons, back in the day of Christ, day of Jesus, if you lived in Israel or lived in a Roman culture in the world during the first century, even the second or third century, they would say that demons, or daimonion, the people in the streets, their culture, would say that a daimonion was a god. And that these gods, and to them, they said daimonion and theos, which is the Greek word God, that these two, to pagans, were interchangeable. That's because they said their demons, or daimonions, their demons were Hercules and Venus and Adonis. And you can name these on, and Diana of the Ephesians. All of these were called demons, and they were ancestors or ancestor worship. What the world would do, and they've done this for thousands of years, they would take an ancestor that had some outstanding event or trait, and they would deify him. To deify a deity is a god. Now, whenever you look up the word daimonion in the Strong's Concordance, it will say a deity. It'll say it's a deity. And then it'll say it means to distribute fortunes. Now, I have read to you out of McClintock and Strong's Encyclopedia, and I've read to you out of books I have on demons and gods in the ancient world, and out of Hastings, and I've got so much information on demons, and it makes people mad when you say there's no such thing as a demon. Jesus said, they would say when you were sick, it was an evil god, or one of these evil gods that would come and get inside of you and lead you to this bad fortune. And they had good and bad demons in the first century. I sometimes forget the information I have. I have so much information in my library. It's a formidable library, and I will forget that I bought a certain book. And I got a paper out of a book that I bought, and I just did a printout on it. And this It's a book called Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible, and I have just missed it. Sometimes I'll lose books in my library. I lost it in my library somewhere along the way, and I forgot I had it. And I'm going to read to you. This is a book edited by Carl van der Toorn, Bob Becking, and Peter W. van der Horst. Usually these books that are written like this are written by historians, sociologists. Sociology is the study of social structure or a culture within a given period. The sociology of the 1800s, you would study the mores and the various customs and culture of the 1800s in America. We've got a you can study the sociological structure of the 60s, and that was the generation where everybody was getting involved in drugs and the hippies were out there. That's a sociological structure. Well, these guys that write these kinds of things, this is on demons and gods of the ancient world. And I'm going to read some of this to you. It's really good. The term demon is a rendering of the cognate Greek words daimon, D-A-I-M-O-N, and its substantive neuter adjective, daimonion. Post-classical Latin borrowed the words in the forms D-A-E-M-O-N and D-A-M-O-N-I-U-M. D-A-E-M-O-N. So when you see D-A-E-M-O-N, it's the same thing as those words right there, daimonion and daimon. Then he goes on to say, the original meaning of the term daimon from the time of Homer onward. From Homer, we're not talking about Homer and Jethro either. We're talking about the ancient philosopher Homer. Most of y'all don't even know who Homer and Jethro is, do you? From Homer forward, they say the meaning from Homer forward was divinity. A divinity is a god, isn't it? Denoting either an individual god or goddess. That's what demons were back then. Jim, why are you so intent on this? Because there's two doctrines in the Bible. There's the doctrine of demons, or daimon, which means to distribute fortunes, which fulfills the flesh. And there's the doctrine of Christ, which means crucify the flesh, because you got so much flesh in you and you have to take your cross and die daily. The deity will put in mind Deci daimonia means reverence for the divinity or reverence for the deity. Deci, D-E-I-S-I-D-A-I-M-O-N, D-E-I-S-I-D-A-I-M-O-N-I-A. And we remember the word Deci daimonestheros. That's the word where Paul told the people at Mars Hill, I perceive in all things you're too superstitious. It means a fear of the gods. Then he goes on to say, the etymology more likely stems from the root dio, D-A-I-O, meaning to divide destinies. Divide means to distribute, to cut something off and distribute it. It comes from that root, D-A-I-O. This is a very good article. I'm going to have this made up and give this to people. Thus the word can designate one's fate, destiny, and that's what these gods would do. They were supposedly accompanying the people who believed in them, distributing good or bad fortunes to them, depending on whether they were a good demon or a bad demon. Or the spirit controlling one's fate. One's genius. I like that. Because genius is what the Romans called them. And the Arabs called them genies. Genie, I is plural. And the Jews called them daimon. And they would distribute fortunes. Genies would give you your wishes and distribute fortunes. Genius, the Romans called them that. And that meant you were specially gifted to be able to procure fortunes. And totem is what the American Indian would call them. But when you get into totem, which means kinfolk, kinfolk, that was these gods. They deified their ancestors. They deified Nimrod. Nimrod began the Babylonian system at Babel in Genesis 11. Genesis 11. And their doctrine was, let us make us a name. Name is the word Shem. And it means authority. Let us make up our own authority. And their imagination went crazy. And they took Nimrod and called him Hercules in one society, called him Adonis in another society, called him Attis in another society. And it was all just a deification of Nimrod at Babel. And the women, Venus or Diana or Aphrodite, this was the queen of heaven, or Nimrod's consort, whoever his wife, girlfriend was. I'm not going to get into arguments about that. Some people want to fight over that. The daemons could be described as either good. Oops, wait a minute, I missed something. The etymology more likely stems from the root dao, to divide destinies. Thus the word could designate one's fate or destiny, or the spirit controlling one's fate, one's genius. Commonly the word designated the class of lesser divinities arranged below the Olympian gods, the daimones. What they're saying, D-A-I-M-O-N-E-S, they're saying, if you'll notice in these movies, they're saying that from Mount Olympus, Mount Olympus over there in Greece, this was the pantheon of the gods, was the temple of the gods in Greece. And they say that these gods, these daimones, were demoted from the mountain of the gods. And you'll see this if you watch a Hercules movie. If you watch an Attis movie. This movie came on the other night, and I thought, I'll watch this. And it was about Thor. If it's a Thor movie, he was demoted from the mountain of the gods and sent to the earth. All of them are put down to the earth. These demons were lesser gods than the gods that didn't have to leave Mount Olympus. So they actually just took these gods, implemented them into their society, and they said these gods were accompanying them everywhere in their society because they'd been demoted as daimones from Mount Olympus. I even read out of last week or week before, I read out of one of the books that I've got, I believe it was Harvest of Hellenism, how they had been demoted from Mount Olympus. So they were supposed to be something that was wandering through the earth and would go and inhabit somebody and break their leg or make them go into battle and get killed or give them a job or elevate them to be somewhere high in the government or to become rich. They attributed all of that to these gods that were demons. Let me read a little more of this, and I won't spend a lot of time on it. I thought it was really good. The daimones could be described as either good or evil. We've said that 1,000 times in this study. They called them good demons and bad demons. When you study fairies, they say they had good fairies and bad fairies. I mentioned this morning that sprites was the name of some of the fairies. You had trolls, you had gnomes, the trolls and the gnomes were evil fairies, and you had good fairies. You had pixies and brownies. Sometimes the brownies were bad. It's really strange the way you have 1,000 names of fairies. I couldn't even begin to get into all of them. So they had good and bad ones, and it's the same thing when you see a cartoon and you see, I heard Hank Hanegraaff the other day said, well, Satan comes and he sits on your shoulder and whispers in your ear. That's a bad demon. When your man is drawn away, he's drawn away of his own lust and enticed. He wants to put it off on a demon or the devil whispering in your ear rather than you being accountable. When people say the devil made me do it, like Flip Wilson used to say, of course he was saying it as a joke, but when the world says It's a demon that's in me. What that is an excuse so they don't have to face their own sin and repent of it. Jesus didn't say, if any man will come after me, let him deny his demon. He said, let him deny himself. Now, let me continue to read this. Not until post-exilic times, exilic, E-X-I-L-I-C, that's after the exile of Israel in Babylon. Not until after their exile in intertestamental literature with the rise of dualism and the concept of devil did the word begin to display the meaning evil demon in league with the devil. It wasn't until after Israel comes out of the captivity that evil demon meant to be in league with the devil. Israel didn't have demons in the ancient world. They got that out of Babylon. In fact, the demons in Pentecostal churches is Babylonian. It's man's wild and vivid imagination. The only problem every one of us have is self. What we have to do is repent. Now, I've had people say, well, I'm not going to believe there's no such thing as demons because I don't believe that I'm a God. That's not what we said. We don't believe in gods either, but we don't believe in demons either. Demons are mythological gods. When you look up daimonion in Strong's, it'll say deity. Well, how many deities are there? How many gods are there? You can't come up and say, well, I don't believe in demons because I don't believe in gods. No, I believe in, no, one lady said, I believe in demons because I don't believe I'm a god. Huh? She said, if a demon is self and a demon's a god, then I would be a demon. I would be a god. She's very confused. We don't believe in demons. We believe a true demon is self. And demon is imaginary, but self is not. Jesus rebuked him, the man. Him is auto, A-U-T-O. It's the word self there in Mark, the first chapter. Let me keep reading here. Then he goes on to say, the related term daimonion in the classical period meant similarly the divine power, the divinity. A divinity is a god. Daimoneo, D-A-I-M-O-N-A-O, all these are variations of the same spelling. D-A-M-O-N-A-O. D-A-I-M-O-N-A-O. Daimoneo. Where was I here? Daimoneo and daimonizomai both originally meant to be under the power of a god. Well, there's not any gods except Jehovah God. It meant to be under the power of a god or a daimon, which condition was often a blessing, producing prophetic utterance or heroic behavior. The first place man was called heroes was back there at Babel. It was said by many historians that Nimrod went out and slew a great bull with his hands, put the horns on his head, tied the tail around his waist, tied the hooves around his feet, and we get the picture of Satan. But I am a he-roe. A roe was a deer. It was the beauty of the deer with the he in it. And that's why they wear the deer skins across them. And you see these old strong men at the circus, and then they have this deer skin across them, and they'd be saying, I'm the hero. Heroes were first called. But listen to this. Listen to this. This is strictly from a historical, sociological viewpoint of the ancient world. These men are not preaching whether you believe in demons or not. They're telling you what they called them in ancient times. This is not a book on somebody's religious views. It's not what it is. It's just simply telling you what they call daimons in the first century and in the ancient world. Now, you've heard me say this. Listen to this. Both originally meant to be under the power of a god or a daimon, which condition was often a blessing, producing prophetic utterance or heroic behavior, it could also be a curse, and the words could mean to be insane. I have said that before. To be possessed with demons. Possessed with demons, with daimonion. The word is one word in the Greek. It's the word daimoniizomai. When you look that up in McClintock and Strong, it will tell you that it can mean to be insane. Well, when you go back over there to Luke the 8th chapter, Luke 8, after. I've had people ask me, the one question I have asked more than any other question about demons, what went into the pigs? Like that guy called Hank Hanegraaff the other day. Let me ask you, he's talking real country, and he wasn't going to be fooled. He was a simple common man, but with common sense you could tell that. He said, I want to ask you, Hank, now when them dang piggies run down that hill into that water, what happened to them dang piggies? And I just thought, Hank with his big $20 words in his vocabulary did not know how to answer that guy. He started talking in a circle. Well, look here in Luke 8. This is the man of the Gadarenes. Everybody wants to know what happened to the man. What happened to him? All right. Now, the Scripture says this man was possessed with devils. Now, hereafter, I haven't gone through this in a long time. And Jesus comes, well, let's start in verse 26. And they arrived at the country of the Gadarenes, which is over against Galilee. They had crossed the Sea of Galilee. Crossed the Sea of Galilee. And they come to the land of the Gadarenes. Here you are. Here's Israel. Here's the Mediterranean Sea, and here's Lebanon up here. And goes over here. Here's Egypt down here. There's the Delta land, and goes down to the Nile River, and here's the Arabian Peninsula. And up here is the Sea of Galilee. And they are going across the Sea of Galilee to Gadara. And they're over here on the other side of Galilee, and there's a guy keeping some pigs. We know one thing for sure, that these men keeping these pigs are not Israelites. We know that, don't we? Because pigs are an unclean animal. So, they arrived at the country of the Gadarenes, which is over against or on the other side of Galilee. And when he went forth to the land, there met him out of the city a certain man which had devils a long time, and wear no clothes. Now that's pretty significant. I've heard of people kind of getting out of their mind and getting crazy. I knew a guy here in town, his dad would go crazy and just get off to himself, and he would walk down the road over here naked as a jaybird, carrying cans of gasoline. I don't know where he's going and what he's going to do. And I've heard of other people doing the same thing. It's when a person gets out of their mind. And neither abode in any house, but he abode in the tombs among the dead. Well, the custom and the culture was in that day that they could talk to the dead. And they called that necromancy. And they would talk into a bottle, and the bottle was a goat skin, was a goat's stomach. They would plug one in, and then they would pretend to be talking to the dead by ventriloquism, and that was called familiar spirit, And familiar spirit is the word ob in the Hebrew. It means bottle. It was nothing but trying to pass off ventriloquism as talking to one of your dead ancestors. An ancestor, that was a demon, wasn't it? They were talking to a demon or an ancestor in a bottle. Maybe Hercules was in there or something, you know. An ancestor. All of this is ancestor worship. The first ancestor worship that I remember hearing about when I was a kid in school was Shintoism in Japan. I knew that was ancestor worship. I was familiar with that, and that the Japanese would have 700, 800 little gods on their little altar inside their house. And if you said to them, would you like to accept Christ as your God? They'd say, yes, give me a statue of him. I'll stick him up here with the rest of my gods. They were DC Dimonesteros. They had a fear of the gods, so they wanted to keep all of them in case they missed one. Then he abode among the tombs so he could talk to his ancestors, his demons, in a bottle. And of course, it was a myth. That word bottle, when it's translated into the Septuagint, the translators in 200 BC call that in gastro muthos. It is a myth in the gastro or the stomach. It was a myth in the stomach of a goat, and that's what the translators of the Septuagint said. They were 200 BC. They were saying it's mythology. If these are gods, if a demon is a god, it's not a real God, it's a mythological God. And mythological gods are an invention of man's own mind, isn't it? Now, when this man saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him with a loud voice, said, what have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of God, Most High? I beseech thee, torment me not. For he had commanded the unclean spirit. Wait a minute, I think we've talked about that before in Mark, the 1st chapter, haven't we? It was a man had an unclean spirit, and Jesus rebuked him, A-U-T-O, and that is the word self. Jesus is not saying they're gods. They said they were gods. For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. This was terminology for saying Jesus commanded the man to repent. For oftentimes it had caught him, and he was kept bound with chains and fetters, and he brake the bands and was driven of the daemon into the wilderness. And Jesus asked him, saying, what is your name? Except that's not what he said. He said, T, that's an interrogative, a question. T, soy, estin, onoma. Onoma is the word name. It means authority. He said, what fellowship, this is a form of sum, soy, O-I is plural. What are you fellowshipping? What, T, what fellowship are you, what are you fellowshipping with? What represents? Esteem is not the common word is. It means what represents. Authority that you are fellowshipping with. What is this thing you think you're doing? That's what he said. Where was I? What is your name? What represents fellowship? And the man said, legion. The word in the Greek is the word legion, L-E-G-E-I-O-N. Now this is the man's words. Man's words, Jesus didn't say he was legion. Legion is a Roman word. It means 3,000 to 6,000. At one time, a Roman legion was 3,000 soldiers. Through the years, they had upped that to 6,000. So what the man is saying, I've got 3,000 to 6,000 entities that's living inside my body. Now, you believe Jesus believed that. That's the man's words. That's not Jesus' words. He says, but I want you to notice real close, I've said this before. He said legion. If you actually frame that the way we would frame it in the English, we would say it this way. And he said, legion. Quotes. That's the way we would write it, because that is his words. That's not the Bible's words. This is one of those things that's in the Bible, but it doesn't mean it's true, because it's a man who's a nutcase saying it. You understand what I'm saying? He's wacky, and he's saying, I got a legion in me. Ooh, I got all these demons in me. And he used feminine gender. Feminine gender. Well, those people that said most of the demons that inhabited their bodies, they said most of them were female. Then the Bible says, because when you leave the word legion, you go right back to the Bible. Because many daimonion were entered into him. And when you look up the word daimonion in your interlinear Bible, go to your parsing guide or to your analytical lexicon and look it up. That word daimonion is neuter gender. Now this man is saying, I got all these female, I got 3,000 to 6,000 female demons in me, and they are legion. And the Bible says, because many neuter gender daimonion was in him. And another thing they said in the first century, that these, I started to say something, forgot what it was. These daimonions, they said they could make them sick, they could do all these things. God is not agreeing with the man by what he's saying here. Now let's keep reading and see what happens. But you really can't see what was in the swine until you go to, let's read what happens to him after the swine situation happens, okay? Go up here to after Jesus cast this thing into the swine. Here's what happens. Verse 35. I'm trying to point out to you the best way to see what was in him was show what was going on before Jesus cast out self and what happened after he cast out. Then they went out to see what was done and came to Jesus and found the man out of whom the daimonion were departed, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed. He was naked, running around acting like a nutcase before that, and in his right mind. The word right mind is sophroneo. The word sophroneo is the word sane. Sane. Remember the word damonizomai is the word possessed. It's one word in the Greek, possessed with devils. The word possessed with devils is the word demonizomai, meaning insane. Well, when you look at the next verse, let's read on down to it. They found him clothed, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid because he was listening to Jesus' instruction. When you're in the self, you're listening to your own instruction. And then verse 36 says, they also which saw it told them by what means he that was possessed with devils was healed. Possessed with devils is the word demonizomai. When you looked it up in McClintock and Strong, it says insane. He was insane before and he's sane now. Whatever happened between brought him to sanity, didn't it? Brought him out of himself. Well, you see the word healed? They want to know by what means he that was possessed with devils was healed. The word healed is sozo, saved. The way you're going to have to see what happened is realizing he was possessed with devils. He was nuts, nutting a fruitcake, naked, up there trying to talk to the dead in the tombs. And when he came to his right mind, he is sane. Sophroneo. What happened in between was what brings a man out of being crazy. Well, look and see. The man thinks, among the pagans in that day and time, pigs were a god. They were a holy animal. One of the most holy animals of the world at that time would be swine. The word swine means boar. Now, among the Egyptians, they said that when you died, if you were a believer in Osiris, Osiris was said to be a great boar in the sky, somewhere off in the heavens, wherever they lived. And that when you died, you got to be a part of the great boar, a part of Osiris. We know these were not Jews. And he certainly wasn't a Christian. And he had been insane, and now he was saved or delivered. So what happens between? You got to get insane before, insane after. What brings a man out of insanity is when God brings him to himself. What he's saying, when you get so much into yourself and it drives you up the wall. Now, what that man did, he did according to what the first century attitude was about having a demon. He was trying to talk to the dead up there in the tombs. And he lost his mind. Today, if somebody loses their mind, we put them out here in Central State. Some guy's saying, I'm Napoleon. Well, does that make him Napoleon? No. Do we believe he's Napoleon? No. Why did they believe that they had demons? Because these were very superstitious people in the first century. They were always running from spells and casting spells. Well, what happens when he cast these into the swine? Here's what the man believed. If he believed whatever everybody else believed in that day and time, he believed that if he could keep his familiar around, a familiar spirit was a family spirit. It was an ancestor that they would talk to in bottles. They had talked to among the tombs. You know, we have people that talk to tombs today, don't we? Have people go out to the grave and they're wasting their time talking to a tombstone. Mom, this is your birthday today and I brought you some flowers. And they're sitting there talking to the dirt. I'm sorry, but your mom is either in heaven or in hell. She can't hear a word you're saying. It's a waste of time to go to a graveyard and start talking to your ancestor. That's what they did. Didn't they? Rich man died and in hell. And Lazarus died and was carried to Abraham's bosom. Now, let's read a little. No, wait, let me go back to this swine. Now, verse 31, and they besought him that he would not command them to go out in the deep. Who is they? They is not the demons. They is more than, you'll find this. This is why you need to read every account of this. When you read Matthew 8 and Mark 5, those are the corresponding chapters to Luke 8. And you've got over there in Matthew 8, you got two men. So they're imagining they've got all these demons in them, and they're pretending to talk for the demons and say, we don't want to lose all of us that's abiding in us. Command us to go into the swine. They weren't saying command us to go into the swine, so these imaginary entities that they think they have in them can be saved. They want to talk to the swine. In the first century, they would say, well, if I can't have my familiar in me, I want it in an animal nearby that I can consult. In fact, there was a movie in the 60s. It was with Kim Novak and Jack Lemmon and James Stewart. And Kim Novak and Jack Lemmon were witches. And James Stewart was trying to date Kim Novak and her character. And Kim Novak was a witch, and she had a familiar in the movie. It was a comedy, but they knew more about this than most preachers know in pulpits. It's funny how these Hollywood producers will research when a preacher won't. And whenever she wanted something to happen, when James Stewart started finding out who she was, she'd have a broom to fall on him, or the familiar spirit was a cat named Pyewacket. I don't know if you ever saw it. But the cat would make a broom fall or something happen, and that was the familiar that man thought he had in the tombs. He wasn't wanting to get rid of the demons. He's wanting them to stay by. And Jesus is saying, I'm going to show you what happens when I put inside you what you think is your familiars. I'm going to show you what's going to happen. I'm going to transgress the law of nature and put the desire for self in those pigs that has driven you out of your mind. Do you think Jesus is cooperating with him, and he's going to let him have his way with these swine? He's wanting the swine to stick around so he can talk to them. That's what they all did. If you read enough and study enough on demons, you're going to find out that's what they believed in the first century. They besought him that he would not command them to go out into the deep. Well, if Jesus is cooperating with them, he would have caused them not to go into the deep. And there was there an herd of many swine feeding on the mountain, and they besought him that he would suffer them to enter into them, and he allowed it. Then went the devils out of the man, or went self, neuter gender. Remember, Mr. Lightfoot tells us, he said they called all of their sins and vices in the first century by the title of daimonion. They said that was their sins. They said, this is my demons, my sins and my vices. And the herd ran violently down a steep place into the lake and was choked. Now that was a Babylonian thing that was going on there, and always Babylon is cast into the sea. We find that in Revelation the 18th chapter. We find it in Jeremiah the 51st chapter. We find Jesus saying, if you'll say to this mountain, be thou removed and be thou cast into the sea. A mountain was the capital city of an empire, and Babylon was a proud mountain. God says, you're a destroying mountain. I'm going to make you a burnt mountain. Now, let me get back over here to this. This is saying the man was crazy. That's what it says. I believe if a man will get so involved in his self, in his desires to be successful, in his desire to get position, And he's so proud, and he wants to fight and battle. The reason I know this is what I did. And it drove me out of my mind. When I was 27, 28, I wanted to be famous. I wanted my group to be on top of the world. I wanted the world to hear me sing. I wanted to be somebody. And I went bananas. I went to doctors. I would say, Doc, I don't understand. Why is it I can't get along with anybody in the world? He'd say, Jimmy, why do you want to get along with the world? They're starting wars. They're killing each other. Why do you want to do that? And one doctor told me that. Another one diagnosed me as manic depressive. Do I believe that? No. The doctor didn't know what he was talking. Did you know that manic depression is a theory? It is not a fact. Does the Bible say anything about manic depression? No, it says something about being insane right here. But Jesus said it was an unclean spirit, and he said that's self. That's what he said, didn't he? He said the man has an unclean spirit. He's into himself. If you'll let I don't know if any of you have been that far off the deep end, wanting to accomplish things in life to the point that you'll destroy your body, your health, and everything else. I destroyed myself for 20, 25 years. And if you'll do that enough, you'll want to go jump off a cliff somewhere or go crawl in a hole. I stayed mad at the world for years. I know this from personal experience that getting involved in yourself, having an overwhelming desire to be rich and famous, and saying, I can get there and I'll kill myself and that's what I have to do, you'll end up being a basket case. I believe that's all that insanity is. It is just an overwhelming desire to be in yourself. I told a fellow the other night that called me from Arizona, Tim Kett. Tim said, I'm diagnosed as manic depressive and I can't get along with anybody. I said, Tim, let me tell you what this is. I said, I don't believe in manic depression. I don't believe in bipolar. The Bible doesn't teach that. It teaches you can get crazy in yourself. I said, the reason, and I said, let me describe some things you feel. I said, you feel like everybody's on top of the world, and you hadn't been able to get up there where everybody else is, and you feel less, and you don't know why you can't be there. He said, that's right, that's how I feel. I said, let me tell you what's up on top of the world. I've been out there in real estate. I felt the same way when I was young. I thought, what is wrong with me? There wasn't anything wrong with me. I was a believer. I was elect of God. And I couldn't understand why I couldn't be up there where the upper crust of the world was. I got up there in gospel music, and I found out they were a bunch of slugs, a bunch of womanizers, a bunch of drinkers, just cussing, drinking, taking pills, drugs of all kinds. I thought, what is this? And then I got off in real estate. I thought, yeah, if I can get at the top of the business world, and I think I can really do good at it. And I got into real estate, and I got at the top of it, and I was one of the top salesmen here in Sumner County. And I got up there, and I thought that was the cream on the top of the milk. It's the scum on the top of the water. People on the top have no principle. Don't you know that? And I was telling Tim that. I said, Tim, it's not you. You think you need to be up there where everybody else is, and you can't understand why you've been so downtrodden all your life. That's why Paul said, and we read the words this morning, we need to give more honor to the uncomely parts of the body of Christ. They don't fit. It's not because they couldn't have been taught to fit. If you fit with the world, you're in the wrong place. Now, it nearly drove me nuts. I was at a jumping off place. I was taking truckloads of Valium and Dalamine. They got new names for them now. That was back in 69 and 70. I'd have to take 60 milligrams of Valium just to get me down to level where everybody else was, because I trembled and shook all the time. And I was just mad. Has anybody ever been like that? That's because you're trying to get something you're not supposed to have. You're trying to get self. And I told Tim that. I said, Tim, I don't believe in what they've diagnosed. The Bible doesn't teach that. If we can come to the place and realizing that predestination is true and God works all things after the counsel of his own will, and everybody's exactly where they're supposed to be, and those of us that have something on the ball, we're to pick those people up that don't have anything on the ball. God didn't give some of us a lot of drive and get up and go so that we can lift ourselves above others. He gives us whatever we have so we can lift up those people that can't lift up themselves. And I'm going to keep telling Tim that. People say, you're giving a bad diagnosis. No, I'm not. Not according to this book, I'm not. There's no such thing. People are bipolar because they can't get up to where everybody else is. You're not supposed to be up there where everybody else is because what's on the top is nothing. I've said this 1,000 times, and I wish I'd have clipped it out of the magazine where I read it. A big super rock star. I don't remember who he was, but he was somebody, one of the big superstars, one of those guys. It was a rock star out of the 70s. He said, everybody's trying to climb to the top of society, and he said, I've been there, and there's nothing there. And Dave can tell you that because he's traveled with those guys. There's nothing but a drunken wild time trying to look for something that is not there and you can't fulfill yourself. And most of those guys are dead that was alive when you were around, weren't they? They're dying like flies. You want the wrong thing. You're wanting what this man wanted. I don't believe in bipolar. I do not believe in schizophrenia. The only schizophrenia, that's the dual personality. The only schizophrenia I believe in is the inner man and the outer man, and it's a war. There's an inner man, which is Christ in us, and that's an outer man, and that's self. And if you don't believe there's an inner man and an outer man, and you're at war, then you're not involved in the inner man. I've had people say, well, I don't believe in that inner and that outer man stuff. Paul said that in Romans the 7th chapter. That's because you got your outer man going full speed ahead. I don't believe in what most people believe about sickness. I was dying at 45. I'm not saying this to brag and boast. I was in the hospital dying after 25 years of seeking myself here in Hendersonville Hospital, coughing and hacking and spitting. And I said, Lord, I'm going to serve you from now on. It's me and you against the world, and I let go of everything, all my real estate career and everything else. And Mary would say, what are we going to do? How are we going to live? I said, I don't know, but I'm going to teach Bible. I would do what little I could selling real estate, and eventually I moved out of it, but I coughed and hacked and spit for all through my 50s. Coughed constantly. If you listen to any of my messages out of 1996, 97, I'm very sick. Do I look like it and sound like it now? I'm not. God has healed my body because He's changed my mind. He said to me the same thing He said to this man here. He drove those self out of me and drove it into the deep. I believe if I can say this to enough young people and tell you, you're not supposed to be on top of the world. You're supposed to be, Jim, are you supposed to sit back and wait till it comes to you? No. Work as hard as you can. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. Do it all to the glory of God, and do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. And the results belongs to God. Now let me finish reading this article here. They say that it could also be a curse, or the words could mean to be insane. And later authors, especially Jewish and Christian, they came to mean to be possessed by a demon, which caused bodily infirmity and insanity. Was I bodily infirmed when I was into self? I was a sick man for 20 years, sick every day of my life, fighting for breath. I saw a special on Bobby Darin. Bobby Darin had scarlet fever when he was young. It gave him a permanent sickness. He would go out and perform on all these stages all over the country, a great, great talent. He'd go into Las Vegas and perform. He'd go off stage and use a breathing machine between sets. And it was killing him. And guess what? It finally killed him. I believe that being into yourself will make you sick. That's the demon that makes you sick. It's you. I've really come to the realization. Y'all have heard me say this. I don't have any dreams about next month, next year. I have no dreams. All I'm going to do is serve God today. Take no thought for the morrow. The morrow shall take thought for the things of itself, and sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. There'll be enough evil to go around tomorrow when it gets here. Do everything you can do today and go to sleep and forget about it. That's what the Bible is saying. Did you know that? Live for today, not next year. There's nothing I have ever planned that worked out the way I planned it. Did it you, Ken? Nothing has ever worked out according to my plans. By this age, I was going to be a retired super singer of the world and super preacher. And I'm happier than I've ever been in my life. More content than I've ever been. And I got a whole lot of enemies. But I can go home at night and rest and sleep. And I'm not dreaming about anything next year. The word, he goes on to say, demonizomai is found once in the New Testament as a verb in the phrase cruelly tormented by a demon in Matthew 15:22. The word and concept demon underwent fundamental change in antiquity caused by the rise of dualism, that's two gods, in the essential monistic cultures of the Near East. Let me drop down here. There was as yet no arch enemy, devil, nor a rival camp of satanic demons tempting and deceiving humans into sin and blasphemy, eventually to be cast in eternal hell at the final end of the present age. That's not what they said in the ancient world. Those people, their idea of demons and spirits was different than what ours are. That's all I'm going to read on that, and I'll make some copies of that. It goes on, and it talks about it being self, being insanity. That's all it is. I have personally experienced that insanity. Has any of you ever been to a place where you're just at the jumping off and you think you're about to break and you can't think straight? That's what I'm talking about. It wasn't you. You're elect. You're not supposed to be doing that. Quit that. That's the best way to say it. We're supposed to be content with such things as we have. But he has more than I have. She has more than I have. You are exactly where you're supposed to be, but you're not supposed to stay there. But don't try to worry yourself into who you're going to be and what you're going to become and how much money you're going to have. We're not supposed to be doing that. Or what kind of position you're getting, or your promotions that you're going to get. That has nothing to do with us, does it? Now, we've been talking about, I've got a paper here. This is out of the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament. It's a 2-volume set. Everybody needs to get that. Theological Word Book of the Old Testament by Harris, Waltke, and Archer. Gleason Archer is one of my favorite 20th century writers. He is one of the contributors to this. And they go into the word demon in the Old Testament. And let me read something to you out of this. The word demon is actually the word shed in the Hebrew. What I'm trying to do is document to you with all that I've taught on the last several years on demons. The word appears, this word shed, it's, when you look up the word devil in the Strong's, it will be the number 7,700. You look up 7,700 in the back of your Theological Word Book, and it'll give you the Theological Word Book number, and you turn to that in one of the 2 volumes. And it's numerically in the book. Now, when he says in Deuteronomy 32:17, I want to show you what he says. Look here in Deuteronomy 32:17. He's talking about evil pagan people. 32. Well, he's actually talking about Israel sacrificing to other gods besides Jehovah God. Now, read here in chapter 32, Deuteronomy. Let's start reading here in verse 15. But Jeshurun, which is another name for Israel, waxed fat and kicked, Thou art waxen fat, thou art grown thick, thou art covered with fatness. Then he forsook God which made him, and lightly esteemed the rock of his salvation. They provoked him to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations provoked they him to anger. They sacrificed unto devils, not God. That word devil is the word shed. That would equate to the New Testament word demon. Who do you think they were sacrificing to? Actual demons? That word is translated to the word daimonion in the Septuagint. Do you actually believe that Israel and all these pagans were sacrificing to demons? No. They were sacrificing to those sun and tree goddesses. So when it says they were sacrificing to devils, not to God, to gods whom they knew not. He's saying that demons right here are gods. Can you see that? He's saying shed is God, and that's daimonion, that's gods. So he's saying they sacrifice to gods they knew not, to new gods that came newly up, whom your fathers feared not. Saying, Israel, you fear them, but your fathers didn't fear them. Let me continue reading this. To gods whom they knew not, look at Psalms 106. Psalms 106. The worst thing you can get involved in is yourself. Some of you have probably been where I've been and been at the jumping off place, and that's because I wanted what I wanted and I didn't care what it cost me. Didn't care if it cost my health and everything else. Don't care if I died getting there, as long as you could stick me up on a pole at the end of it all and say, look at there, isn't he wonderful? I'd be dead. And you know what? It was killing me. I don't think anybody's gotten involved more in themselves than I have in this ministry. I am so ashamed of the things I've done. I was a foolish, foolish man. Look at Psalms 106. When people say it was not self, you hadn't been where I've been, evidently. I'm looking at the camera. Self will kill you. Psalms 106. 106. Now, God is talking about Israel getting polluted. Let's start here in... This is about Israel and God destroying Israel. I don't want to read the whole thing. Let's start here somewhere about verse 26. Therefore God lifted up his hand against them to overthrow them in the wilderness. He's talking about Israel, isn't he? The only people he overthrew in the wilderness were the wicked Israelites in the wilderness. To overthrow their seed also among the nations, and to scatter them in the lands, they joined themselves also unto Baal Peor. Baal Peor was a city that they had to come through in the land of Moab just before they crossed the Jordan River to possess the land. And they picked up Baal worship at Baal Peor. You find that in the book of Numbers. They joined themselves unto Baal Peor. He's talking about Israel. And ate the sacrifices of the dead, Israel. Thus they provoked God to anger with their inventions, and the plague brake out upon them. We know that God hit them with plagues, one after the other. At one point, he brought in all those serpents into Israel, had them biting the people, and they were dying. Then stood up Phinehas and executed judgment, so the plague was stayed. And that was counted unto him for righteousness unto all generations for evermore. Now, we're not talking about the Phinehas who was a son of Eli. We're talking about a Phinehas who was a descendant of the priesthood of Aaron. They angered God also at the waters of strife. We've been studying about that on Wednesday night. Israel angered God, so that it went ill with Moses for their sakes. because they provoked his spirit so that he spake unadvisedly with his lips. They did not destroy the nations like God told them to do when they came into Israel. They married them, concerning whom the Lord commanded them, but they were mingled with the heathen when they married them, there in the 3rd chapter of Judges, and learned their works, and they served their idols, which were a snare unto Israel. Yea, they sacrificed their sons and their daughters unto devils shed. Do you actually think Israel was sacrificing to some thing that got inside their body and made him go, ah? No, they were sacrificing to other gods, to Molech, to Shemash, to Isis, Osiris, to Rimmon of the Syrians. They sacrificed to Baal in the grove. That's who Israel's sacrificing to. The Bible says they sacrificed to demons. Because shed is translated demon. It's translated demon. It's a daimonion. And they shed innocent blood, even the blood of their sons and their daughters, whom they sacrificed unto idols of Canaan, and the land was polluted with blood. Now, let me read some more of this here. They sacrificed their sons and daughters. Perhaps it occurs for a 3rd time in Amos 2:1, because he burns the bones to a demon, changing into lime. Undoubtedly, the Hebrew shed is to be connected with the Babylonian shedu, S-H-E-D-U, a demon either of good or evil. You say, Jim, how are we going to understand all that? I just want you to understand there's no such thing as demons. Demons are mythological gods. That's what they are. Whenever you look up the word daimonion in the concordance, it says a deity. The only deity it could be would either be Jehovah or all these mythological gods who are not real. That's one of the two. Isn't that right? It's either got to be Jehovah or Hercules and Venus and all these gods, and they're not real. They're man's imagination. You can't come up and say, well, demons are deities, so therefore they must be gods. No, no. When it says deity, the concordance should say mythological deities. That's what it should say. Because people look at deity, oh, they're gods, huh? No, they're imaginary gods. In pagan religions, the line between gods and demons is not a constant one. What he's saying, in pagan religion, the line between gods and demons is not constant. It disappears, and they come together. That's what he's saying here. There are demons who are beneficent and gods. No, listen to this. This is out of Theological Word Book. Watch how he puts demons and gods, not in opposition to each other, but aligning with one another. I'm going to read this real slow and listen to the way Theological Word Book puts it. There are demons who are beneficent and gods who are malicious. He actually put good gods in the same line with evil demons. He's actually saying there's good gods and bad gods, or good demons and bad demons. That's the way he's putting it. Generally speaking, though, a demon was conceived as being less powerful than a god. That's because they were demoted from Mount Olympus into demons to come down into the world and follow people around. Do you believe that? I don't believe that. It's ridiculous. I've been all over America in hundreds of churches, and they would say they were seeing demons in there, and I didn't see nothing. Some woman went to a Baptist church up the road here, and she used to go around town saying, I was walking around, I saw a demon on this guy's shoulder, and I saw a demon on that guy's shoulder. And she was wacky, though. You talked to her, and you could tell she was nutty. In Mesopotamian thought, the shadow was a supernatural protective power. Protective power, when you see something like that, think guardian. Guardian angel. Protection. Protective power for whose presence the gods were invoked. Specifically, the function of shadow may have been to represent the vitality of the individual, his sexual potency, and much of the sun and tree worship was sex worship. It was about fertility, not just for the land, but having children. And God says, I'm the fertility God, the sexual fertility God. All your children will be born and they'll be healthy. That's what Jehovah God said. One cannot help but notice the paucity of references to the demonic in the Old Testament. Even where it occurs, it is demythologized. They've tried to make it not a myth and make it real. Good and evil are in the moral and not the metaphysical sphere. He's saying it's something that's going in you morally. It's not in this metaphysical sphere like people imagine. When the gods of the nations are called Shedim, it is not meant that they are evil spirits, but they are insubstantial shades, or they are no gods. I like it when he says that. They're not gods. Gleason Archer was a brilliant man. He didn't believe in demons. With neither divine nor demonic functions, the raps are taken off the demonic in the Bible, in the Gospels, and Revelation. That is to say, the demonic appears most profusely when Jesus is present. Perhaps God has opened to us the satanic world only in the presence of Christ. You know what the satanic world is? It's just the opposition to Christ. That's all it is. Satan, Satan, means one who is opposed. It means an adversary. Adversary. Now, what I'm trying to do is share with you some of the things that I have on. Now, we've talked about distributing fortunes. There's a word in the Old Testament. It's the word Gad. Gad. That is one of the gods of the Old Testament. Some say we get the word God from that. Look over here in Isaiah, the 65th chapter. Isaiah 65. How much time do I have, Mike?
21.
All right. I meant to get on back into some of the subjects where I was. I ran across this thing that I had on Dictionary of Deities, demons in the Bible, and I thought I need to share that with you guys. All I'm doing is verifying more and more what we've studied. I don't know how in the world somebody can come up and believe in demons. I can't even grasp that. I have been in churches all over America where Pentecostals were saying there were demons in there with us, and all I saw was a bunch of people wallowing on the floor. And we've got people here that come to Grace and Truth that say they have been out there wallowing on the floor. And say, it took me a long time to learn that I was just being foolish. Look here in Isaiah 65. God is condemning Israel and says, I'm going to call my people by another name. I'm going to be found of them that sought me not, a reference to the Gentiles in verse 1. And I said, behold me, unto a nation that was not called by my name, and that's talking about Gentile church in the New Testament. Then he condemns Israel all down through here. He says, this is what Israel says. They're partaking of abominations before God. And they say in verse 5, stand by thyself, don't come near me. I am holier than you. I'm an Israelite. And then he says, it's written before me, I will not keep silence, but will recompense, even recompense unto their bosom, unto the bosom of Israel, all their iniquities. Your iniquities and the iniquities of your fathers, Israel, together saith the Lord, which have burnt incense upon the mountain and blasphemed me upon the hills. He is not talking about pagans. It's talking about Israel. Therefore will I measure their former work into their bosom. Thus saith the Lord, as the new wine is found in the cluster, and one saith, destroy it not, for a blessing is in it, so will I do for my servants' sakes, that I may not destroy them all. I will bring forth a seed out of Jacob and out of Judah, an inheritor of my mountains. That's talking about the seed will be us. And mine elect shall inherit it, and my servants shall dwell therein. And Sharon shall be a fold of flocks, and the valley of Achor a place for the herds to lie down in, for my people that have sought me. But ye, Israel, are they that forsake the Lord, that forget my holy mountain, Zion, where the law comes from, that prepare a table for that troop. Troop is the word Gad. Gad, it means to distribute. Has the same meaning as daimonion, meaning to distribute fortunes. That pour out drink offerings for that troop, and that furnish the drink offering unto that number. The word number is Meniy, M-E-N-I-Y. And that was the moon goddess. That was the Lord Moon. That was androgynous. It was sometimes male and sometimes female, or it was both. That in Mene was another title for Allah in the ancient world. And Allah comes from the word Alan. Alan is the word oak. That was one of the holy trees of the ancient world, and you find that referred to, that Israel was worshiping there in that 44th chapter of Isaiah. So this is the Gad that it's talking about. And let me read to you out of the Theological Word Book. That is the best source for Jewish definitions, Theological Word Book of the Old Testament. I love that book. It's two volumes by Harris, Walke, and Archer. Gleason Archer is a tremendous writer. This verb is used 11 times in the Old Testament, this verb Gad. 7 of these in the Hithophel stem, and he goes on down through here. He talks about this is one of the gods of the ancient world. I'm not going to read it all. It goes on and on. Since the Bible rejects the pagan idea that God can be coerced, it also forbids such practices as are described in 1 Kings 18:28. Let me see here. But he goes through here and he's talking about how Gad means it's a marauding troop, means to distribute fortunes. The name of the first child born to Jacob by Zilpah, the maidservant of Leah, was Gad, and subsequently one of the tribes to settle in the Transjordan area. His name is to be connected with Gadagid, dude, we have already discussed, Genesis 49:19, which points to Gad's capabilities and military exploits. So that's why it's called, but it was a god they were calling Gad, meant to distribute to them. So they said it was going to distribute fortunes. Now, I'm trying to document things on this thing called, that people talk about, they talk about demons. I don't believe in demons. My personal experience, I have had the demon of self thriving in me. What happens to you? You get mad all the time. You get angry constantly. You're gonna get people back that get you and stop you. You ever felt like that? They stop me and I'll get them. You know what you're doing? You're making yourself sick. That is not natural. The demon of self certainly makes you ill. I don't have any doubt about that. I watched myself get deathly ill. I didn't think I would live to be 50. I used to tell Mary, I'll never breathe right again. If you took breathing treatments on a breathing machine every 2 hours for the last 9 months before I went into the hospital. I couldn't get up out of bed. I was a disaster. My body was a disaster. I'm healthier at 74 than I was at 44. I was in the hospital dying 30 years ago, I thought. And when you come, you know what it's all about? It's about unbelief. The man came to Jesus and said, Lord, I believe, I have faith, but there's a part of me that doesn't believe. Lord, help thou mine unbelief. He said, I've got faith. I have pistis. I believe, Lord, but there's a part of me, apistis is the word unbelief. He says there's a part of me that don't believe you. And that's what self is. That's what that outer man is. There's a part that don't believe God, and it frustrates and it gets mad and gets upset. I want what I want, and nobody's going to stop me. If you get old enough, you'll learn to quit doing that. If you don't, you'll die young. For some reason, God taught me that. I don't know how in the world. When I was in the hospital, Hendersonville Hospital, I've given that testimony 1,000 times. I was laying there. I had been flying high in real estate, and I kept getting sicker and sicker and sicker. I was working about 6 months of the year and staying in bed about 6 months of the year. And finally, I woke up one night and I said, Mary, if you don't get me to the hospital, I'm going to die. And I would just, have you ever pulled so hard for breath and you couldn't get any? I was doing that 24 hours a day. I got to get on that machine. It is a terrifying thing.
Remember in 2003 when I came to visit you?
Huh?
Remember in 2003 when I came to visit you? You were breathing through that machine. What was that?
Oh, I use those. I would carry my little atomizer, my little inhaler. If I got a half a mile from the house without it, I would panic. If I went on a vacation, I'd take 6 or 7 of them. I wasn't supposed to have that many, but I'd get the doctor one at a time, and I'd tell him I was out till I got me a box full to carry with me on a vacation. And I had to have those. I would die if I didn't have them. If I didn't have my aminophylline to carry with me, if I didn't have my machine, I'd carry my machines, everything with me. Let me tell you, self will kill you. It nearly killed me. I know what that man was going through, the man of the Gadarenes. I was one of the sickest men to ever come out of that I've ever seen. I was a dying man in my mid-40s. I know what self will do. When somebody says, well, demons ain't self, well, boy, it sure did it to me. I'm a living testimony. I was crazy. At 35, I was out of my mind. I couldn't have what I wanted. That's an awful place to be. I'll tell you the best place in the world to be is when I was up there in the hospital. I sat up on the side of the bed, looked out at New Shackle Island Road. I sat there and just sat on the side of the bed and dropped my head. I had IVs in both arms. I had given breathing treatments all day long by those technicians. They'd come in there and beat my back to try to get the mucus off my lungs, and they'd come in and pound on me. I'd be fighting for breath. And I sat up there on that side of that bed. I looked out there at New Shackle Island Road, and I said, Lord, you're going to kill me if I don't behave myself. It's the first time I admitted the problem was me. You know what the problem was? It was all that pent-up desire for self inside that was killing me. I thought I was going to die. I couldn't picture breathing. The fact that I'm up here breathing normal is amazing. I just said, Lord, from now on it's just me and you against the world. And I called Mary and I said, bring my concordance and bring this commentary and that commentary and bring this book and that book. And I started walking around on the 3rd floor up there with IVs in my arms, pulling my pulling my IVs, walking around, preaching to the doctors and the nurses and anybody I could get to listen. And from then on, I said, from now on, I'm going to preach truth. I'm not going to be a high-rolling real estate agent, Lord. I ain't even going to do that if I can do anything else and get out of it. Mary would say to me every day, what are you going to do? How are we going to make a living? I'd say, I don't know, Mary, I can't work. I'd get up out of bed and go show a house and come back home and go to bed. I stayed sick for years. I came out of it very gradually. Most of you that's known me since the 90s, I was coughing and hacking and spitting constantly, pulling for breath, even after I come out of the hospital, using that breathing machine, used all that medication for years. And all of a sudden it just died away and I don't need it anymore. I don't take any asthma medicine. I don't even know where those things are. There may be one over here in that one of them drawers. Once in a blue moon, if I lose sleep, I'll get a little short of breath. Just very seldom. That's what self will do to you. It will kill you. If you stress out over anything, you're going to die young. It nearly got me. I am so tired of this flesh. If you get tired of the flesh, I say this, not tired of life. You got to get tired of self. There's a difference. When you're tired of life, you're not tired of self. You're just mad because you can't have what you want in life. When you get tired of self, you'll start serving God. So I'm tired of this man serving himself. I'm going to serve God with all I've got. Do I have any time, Mike? 7 minutes. I'm just documenting some of these things that I've been talking to you about. There's no such thing as demons. Demons are self. I'll tell you what let's do. I just got a few minutes left. Let me read. I'll come back and get into the subjects I wanted to get into, but let me read over in Matthew 8 about this man of the Gadarenes. I believe the man of the Gadarenes was crazy. I believe if I could go out here to Central State and set some of those people down and talk to them. I've talked to some of you people here. I've talked to Dave more than anybody I've talked to here. Dave was a frustrated man just like I was. He was about a basket case of bananas out there in the heavy metal world. And I'd say, Dave, if all these people that we're seeing, he'd ride down the road with me. I'd say, every one of those cars passing, they've all got self in them. They got 1,000 problems they cannot fix. And they all drink iniquity like water. And there's only a few that's going to go through the narrow gate. So most of these people belong to the devil. They're the devil's children. Why get angry at them? Why try to climb their ladder? It's not God's ladder and you're not supposed to be on it. So why get upset? When you learn that and you accept, when you come to a place of being content with such things as you have, learn to be that where you are is exactly where you're supposed to be. If you weren't supposed to be there, you'd be somewhere else, wouldn't you? If God's arranged everything, if he's declared the end from the beginning, and from ancient times, everything that's not yet done, whatever you're going through in life, you're supposed to. What you're doing when you get all upset, I'm not saying accept the enemy's position. Accept the fact that they're supposed to be doing to you what they're doing. Don't get mad at them. Say, God, this is... David said, Shemai, when he's riding along, after God has made him the king of Israel, and Shemai, who was a follower of Saul, starts throwing stones at David. And Abishai, David's nephew, said, Uncle David, I'll go kill that dead dog. I'll take his head off. David said, leave him alone, Abishai. God hath bidden him to throw stones at me. When people are throwing stones at me, Mary gets upset. I say, Mary, they're supposed to be doing that. Sometimes the guys downstairs will get upset. Sometimes Tom will get upset. Sometimes Mike or Dave will get upset. I say, they're supposed to do this. They're supposed to throw stones at me. Learn to accept the stones that are being thrown at you. Live a godly, righteous, holy life before the Lord, and don't worry about what the rest of the world does. That is a script that's been written by God. It's a movie. Watch it. Some guy's yelling at you. Pretend that he's on the TV and say, look at that guy screaming towards the camera, and you're the camera. It's already been arranged. If we can get predestination from our mind to our heart, get the ordination of God from here down to here, say it's supposed to be. Every time something happens, say this is the way it's supposed to be. Do the best you can. The result belongs to God. Doesn't it? But instead, we want to get our minds involved in getting our life fixed and getting to where we think we ought to be. You're not going to be where you think you're supposed to be. Nobody's ever going to get there that's a believer. You're never going to arrive where you think you're supposed to be going. Are you? Because you got too much ideas yourself in your head. Work for Christ. Live for Him. Stand in truth. And don't be concerned about the results. It belongs to God. If you end up nowhere, that's where you're supposed to be, nowhere. If you end up under a tree with a rock to sit on, say, this is where I'm supposed to be. If you're trying to get into a big house out here and you end up in a one-bedroom efficiency apartment, that's where you're supposed to be. If you try to get a new car and you end up with an old junker, that's what you're supposed to have. And those of us here are not going to let you break down so you can't get somewhere. Those of us that have got something going on in our lives, we're supposed to help people. We're one family, aren't we? We're to pick each other up. We're not supposed to put each other down. I have experienced the demon of self in my life. I have experienced sickness because of the demon of self. Sickness to the point of death. Nobody here knows how sick I was. I can express it. I was dying. You just can't believe a man can be dying and back on his feet in 25 years. And where'd all that health go? What happened to me? This right here is a miracle. People say, you don't believe in healing? Well, certainly I do. If you get out of yourself, your body will heal itself to some degree. I'm absolutely sure of that. I believe that's what makes men sick in America. Am I out of time, Mike? I am here to tell you this is the truth. I really want to impress this on everybody so you can get out of trying to be where you think you're supposed to be. Just be what you are. Accept where you are. If you're supposed to be further, you would be. God's got you right where He wants you. Let's pray. Father, thank you for truth. Help us to realize the demon is us. That's why we get sick. That's why we get frustrated. Help us to realize that. Lord, when we're into ourselves, we're insane. Lord, when you call us out of ourselves, that's when you cause us to listen to your instruction and we sit at your feet clothed with the righteousness of Christ. God, we thank you for your truth. Lord, help us to understand the sovereignty, that this is something to live by. It's not just something to come to church to study. Help us to understand that. If you're sovereign, Lord, you're sovereign over everything in our lives. Every good thing and every bad thing. God, we praise you for it all. Lead us to your elect. Open up doors for the ministry, and we'll give you praise for everything in Christ's name. Amen.